When we look at how movements happen at the pelvic girdle, you've got to look at what type of joints are there. So if we analyse it, we now know we've got an immovable joint there. Obviously, a movable joint has sutures where bones are fused together. As we come round, we can clearly see this clear section in between the two pubises. So that is a pad of white fibrocartilage. Now, in a slightly movable joint, we will find white fibrocartilage. If we actually look to the vertebrae, we can see there's white fibrocartilage in between them as well, because they're a slightly movable joint. So wherever there's a slightly movable or a cartilaginous, and there's another clue to it, white fibro pad, it's a form of cartilage. Where there's a cartilaginous effect, we create a slightly movable joint. So the pubis symphysis is what they call a slightly movable joint. Just a little bit of nice to know trivia. When a female is pregnant and the doctors examine her and they'll say she's 4 centimetres dilated, 5 centimetres dilated, they're actually referring to this gap between the two pubis bones, because they secrete a hormone called relaxin that softens cartilage down, and it has a direct impact here which allows these bones to part, which makes childbirth possible. So we've got a slightly movable joint there. If we spin him round, we're now looking at this region here where the innominate bone articulates with the sacrum. Now, we know the sacrum's a fused joint, immovable joint. We now know what that slightly movable joint is at the front, or cartilaginous joint. The point between the sacrum and the pelvis, well, as you can see, there is movement there. So it can't be a fused joint, because a fused joint doesn't move, and it doesn't have a white fibro pad there, so it's not a cartilaginous or immovable joint. Therefore, by the process of elimination, it can only be a freely movable joint. So it's got to have the characteristics of a freely movable joint. The problem now arises to what type of freely movable joint, because obviously there's 6 types. Well, it doesn't characterise this, which is a ball and socket joint. It doesn't characterise this, which is a hinge joint. It can't rotate around itself, so it's not a pivot joint. It doesn't have movements like the finger, because that's a condyloid joint. Kind of only moves a little bit. It has a little bit of movement. Therefore, it's got to be a gliding sliding joint. So when we look to the pelvic girdle, we've got pubis symphysis, this pad of white fibrocartilage, which makes this a slightly movable joint at that point. And at this point, we have a freely movable joint, which is synovial, has all the synovial characteristics, and it is a sliding gliding joint.